Wednesday show, and Mike writes a really good piece about Jahlil Okafor, who reaches the all-star break of his rookie season, and some interesting things about Okafor moving forward. He's an interesting character in this plan, and we bring Mike into the conversation here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm great, Mike. How are you?
Very good, man. And, Okafor, a very interesting guy in this whole Sixer plan, whatever you want to call it, as he has kind of been, some people like him, some people think he is got a huge future. Others wonder if he's going to be traded or not. But so far, have you seen some growth and some change in him since, he's got himself into some trouble? Do you see that he has grown and learned from that as he says he has?
I think it's too early to say. I mean, the kid has just turned 20 in December. As far as we know, he has kept his nose clean, since that street fight in November on Thanksgiving morning. But it's really too early to say, to me, as to whether he's, completely turned things around and whether he's going to stay out of trouble from now on. I mean, he really put himself in some bad situations, early on in his career here. And, you can say it's all his fault. You can say that the Sixers should have done more. You can say that, maybe the losing got to him, whatever the case may be. There's no excuse for it one way or another. And we'll see. I mean, he's an incredibly talented player. But, he got off to a bit of a rough start off the court, and it's going to be on him to make sure he kind of, doesn't continue that and stays on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, and he kind of admitted that in that interview with ESPN, that he was embarrassed by it and that he's watched the video, but that, he thinks he's learned from it. But how much has him and Jerry Colangelo's hiring, how much has that coincided, and what kind of impact has Colangelo had with Okafor?
Well, Colangelo's met with him several times, 4 or 5 times since Colangelo joined the franchise in early December. In fact, Colangelo told me he had set aside time to meet with Okafor on December 26th, which was the day that the Sixers played the Suns in Phoenix, and Colangelo still lives in Phoenix, so it was easy for him to do it. But he's met with him and talked with him several times since then. And, Colangelo is somebody who wields a lot of influence around the NBA, but, could particularly do it with Okafor. Colangelo is very, very close friends with Mike Krzyzewski, who, of course, coached Jahlil in college. Colangelo had met Okafor during some of the U.S. Olympic programs, events. Okafor was involved in that program, I think on the under-19 team, and Colangelo, of course, is in charge of the whole organization. So, that's part of the reason the Sixers brought Jerry Colangelo in, was crisis management and damage control, and that's what Okafor created with these actions, and that's what the Sixers really were ill-equipped to handle. They really had not set up any kind of safety net or program or plan and to kind of help these young guys deal with being in the NBA and being on the road and losing a whole bunch of games and knowing how to act like veterans and professionals. So, Colangelo has clearly taken a lead role with Okafor in that regard, and it's a smart thing to do no matter what Okafor's future with the team is.
Mike Sielski's with us, Philly.com, the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's a really good in-depth piece on the growth of Okafor, who, what about as a player? Are you seeing his game grow? He's 19 years old. People forget that. Or he's 20 years old, I guess, at this point. But people forget that sometimes. I hear a lot of fans critical of his defense, has been questioned a lot. Even Coach Brown on the show the other day said, he still has a long way to go there. But as a low-post player in a game, though, Mike, it really doesn't seem to value that low-post position as much anymore. What do you see from his game halfway through his rookie season?
Well, I haven't seen a whole lot of growth since the start of the season. He entered the league, unbelievably refined and polished with his footwork and his low-post maneuvering for a 19-year-old kid. I would like to see him use his left hand more. I feel like he relies on his right hand maybe a little bit too much. And, given that he's somebody who does get his shot blocked a lot because he doesn't really play above the rim, developing that left hand would be of a help to him. I think it's interesting now that the Sixers have Ish Smith, who's really, a competent point guard, that, you might see some better things out of Okafor. And what's really interesting is that the other night, when they lost to the Sacramento Kings, Nerlens Noel didn't play in that game. And, throughout this first season, through the first 52 games, Okafor and Noel have not meshed well on the court together. And you can make an argument that, yeah, it's early on and 52 games isn't a large enough sample size to say, okay, well, they can't play together. But, the results haven't been good so far. And so now it looks like if Noel is out of the lineup for any length of time with this knee problem, with the tendonitis, then Okafor is going to get a chance to kind of show what he can do if he has more freedom to move in that post. And he had 26 and 10 the other night against the Kings and DeMarcus Cousins. He really held his own against the guy who is probably the most talented big man in the league. So it's an interesting time right now. I mean, I think the Sixers have to figure out what they're doing here with respect to, can these guys play together? Can Brett Brown get them to play together? And then what happens if Joel Embiid comes back next season and is healthy? What do you do then?
There's no question that they have a lot of questions in front of them. Do those questions include, Mike, doing something at this deadline? Meaning if somebody called the Sixers and blew them away for an offer for Okafor or Noel, do you think that with Colangelo's presence here, does he sound like a guy who would be willing to consider that, or would they rather wait to see how Embiid works out and if he's 100% healthy and ready to play?
Well, if I were them, I would wait because Embiid is such a key piece to this whole thing and has been since the moment they drafted him. And there's also the fact that they could have as many as 4 first-round picks in the draft. You don't know yet, A, how many picks you're going to have, and B, where you're going to end up picking. I mean, if you get the number 1 overall pick, that changes everything because presumably you're going to get Ben Simmons, and he's the one surefire superstar in this draft. And if you make a deal at the deadline now, how does that change your plans? It seems to me they've been gearing toward this offseason for a while now. And to make a big trade at the deadline, no matter what they get offered, short of getting offered Steph Curry or LeBron James, I'm not sure it makes sense for them to make a deal. Now, once the offseason comes and goes, then questions start to answer themselves. Then you see, okay, is Embiid healthy? Do we think he's going to stay healthy? And if we think that, what kind of player is he? The dynamic that's in play right now is that Nerlens Noel is a much better defensive player than Jahlil Okafor. So, but the flip side of that is that Okafor has more value to another team because of his offensive skills than he might have to the Sixers. And he would certainly have more value to another team than Nerlens Noel probably would. I mean, Noel is, if you really want to kind of exaggerate it at this stage of their careers, Okafor is shaping up like an Hakeem Olajuwon, and Noel is shaping up like Ben Wallace. And so you would think those two guys would be able to play together, and you'd want to keep both of them. The problem is, A, they don't seem so far to be able to play together, and B, you've got this wild card with Joel Embiid presumably coming next season, and you don't know what kind of dynamic that's going to create.
Mike, last time you were on, right at the end, there was some news about Blake Griffin. I asked you that question, and you said something that was kind of interesting, and you included it in your piece at Philly.com on Okafor about the misconceptions of Henke, because a lot of people think that if Henke is the guy that ultimately makes decisions, that they would be unwilling to make trades that would involve a more established veteran player. What do you think about that at this stage of where they are?
Well, to me, the misconception is that Sam Hinkie has just been plodding along, accumulating assets, collecting draft picks and young players, and that the Sixers were always and totally going to build this, through the draft. And that once you draft a guy, that's it. You don't trade him. And what is he doing? He has all these big men. He has Okafor and Embiid and Noel. And why hasn't he drafted a point guard yet? And is he just collecting all these assets for the sake of having assets? And the reason he's doing all this is because if the right circumstances present themselves, he and the Sixers are then in a position to capitalize on them and maybe make a big trade. Well, I don't think that's going to happen at the deadline. I would be really surprised if it did. But as I said, once this year's draft comes and goes, and once they have a better idea of what they have in Joel Embiid, and certainly in Nerlens Noel and Jahlil Okafor, then they're really in a position to do something big if they want to do that. their situation, for instance, the New York Knicks. The Knicks have Carmelo Anthony, who they probably should have moved on from by now. I mean, they're kind of, muddling along in the Eastern Conference. They're not very good. They're caught in between being challenging for the conference championship or, being just an out-and-out bad lottery team. They keep trying to win. Phil Jackson apparently doesn't want to have a coach unless that coach is willing to run the triangle offense. I mean, they're really a mess. So the Sixers are in far better position than them or some other teams are, to make a big-time move. And I don't think that either Hinkie or Jerry Colangelo would be opposed to it if the right set of circumstances presented themselves.
Yeah, and Mike, it's you saw the Atlanta Hawks, a team that won 60 games last year. Here they are 1 year later, and they want to break that team up. I mean, it really kind of, I don't know if it indicates it's a sad state of the NBA where realistically, unless you have Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, or you're the Spurs, it seems like you realistically can't compete in this league.
You're right. I mean, it's such a top-heavy league. It's been that way for a long time. I mean, go back to the last time the Sixers won a championship in 1983. I think it's been 9 franchises, maybe 10, that have won every NBA championship since then. The Celtics have won multiple championships, the Lakers, the Spurs, the Miami Heat. Other than those 4 or 5 franchises, you've got a couple others sprinkled in here and there, like the Warriors, the Pistons, or the Dallas Mavericks. But it's really, really hard to be a championship team in the NBA, as you said, unless you have one of those transcendent players. And the Sixers, I think, have been smart in trying to get that transcendent player or players. Luck has kind of worked against them. They've been in positions to get the number 1 overall pick, and the lottery ping pong balls haven't bounced their way. Maybe they bounce their way this year. We have to see. But as I said, I think it would be foolish of them to kind of make a big move now before the deadline when so much is still unknown.
A lot of Sixers fans, Mike Sielski's with us from the Inquirer, a lot of Sixers fans bank a lot on Embiid, that if he's healthy, that is really the changer. But how much really do you think is sitting on Okafor's shoulders in his growth as a player? How much rides on him and his success and his future?
Oh, a lot of it, for 2 reasons. Number one, the Sixers may very well end up keeping him, and he becomes, their post scorer for the next 10 to 12 years. And he's a great offensive player and becomes kind of the centerpiece of whatever the team becomes. The other part of it, too, is they need him to develop even if they're going to trade him. The idea that you would trade, in the old way of thinking of the NBA or any other, professional sports league, a player becomes a troublesome kind of guy, who goes through what Jahlil, put himself through early this season. And the answer becomes, well, they got to trade him because, he keeps screwing up off the court or off the field. Well, the Sixers need him to straighten himself out because if they end up trading him for whatever reason, he becomes that much more valuable and you're able to get that much more back for him in some kind of deal. Look, I'm not going to trade. All I'm saying is that things could break a certain way where he becomes the logical piece to move. I keep confusing the names. Assuming Joel Embiid becomes the you think he's going to become, assuming Dario Saric comes over here and is, a terrific player, assuming Nerlens Noel continues to grow as a defensive force, and that you're able to add to the backcourt, in a perfect world, you've got Nick Stauskas, who I guess would develop into some kind of J.J. Redick clone as an outside shooter, to find a point guard at some point in this development process. There's a lot of pieces and a lot of kind of moving parts, and certainly Okafor could be a big, big part of that. We just have to see how things play out during the summer and into next season.
Hey, Mike, how much, the piece mentions Colangelo a lot, and I from what I read, I believe you did a phone interview with him, if I'm right on that. How much does Hinkie, if at all, play into? I mean, does he have a lot of relationship with Okafor? I had heard that when he got into the fight, that Hinkie did go to his hotel room and sat down with him. I mean, does Hinkie have a lot of influence with Okafor as well?
I think he has a pretty good relationship with him, but I also think that carries a level of esteem and respect and cachet, not only in the franchise itself, but around the league, that other guys can't match. That's why they brought him in there, is that, here's a guy who's dealt with agents over 40 some years in the NBA.
Right.
Here's a guy who runs the Olympic program, who was able to persuade guys like Dwayne Wade, Ron James to buy into the idea of building the Olympic team back to a dream team level. The guy is unbelievably influential throughout the league, and so he's going to have more of an impact with Jahlil Okafor for those reasons and more. As I said, he's very close to Mike Krzyzewski. He has those contacts through the Olympics. When Colangelo speaks, people listen, and those people, I think, include Jahlil Okafor. At least the Sixers hope that Okafor is going to listen to it.
No doubt, and good piece on the Sixers by Mike Sielski. We'll transition a little. I know, Pete, you're reading his piece on Dave Hakstol and the Flyers.
Yeah, hi, Mike Sielski. It's Pete Thompson. How are you?
Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Good. Congratulations on the first ever Stan Hochman Award. I thought that was a nice night that you picked up some much-deserved hardware, and wanted to say congratulations on that first and foremost.
Thanks so much.
Tell me about, your relationship with the Flyers is an interesting one, right? Right when you first came into town? For those
it has. I'd like to think that I ushered in the era of culture change.
Yeah, that was and could you real quick tell the welcome mat story?
Sure. No, just literally a week after I came on board with the Inquirer, the Flyers fired Peter Laviolette as their head coach and hired Craig Berube, and I went to a press conference and went back and forth with Ed Snyder about the Flyers' kind of insular way of doing things and their propensity to bring on, ex-players and guys who've been involved with the organization for a long time and kind of doing things the same way all the time. And Mr. Snyder was not happy with me at the time. But since then, after they got rid of Craig Berube and, they hired Dave Hakstol out of the University of North Dakota, and Ron Hextall, as the general manager, has taken a far more patient and kind of deliberate approach in rebuilding the Flyers. And I kid when I say I brought in this era of culture change, but I'm pleased as somebody who analyzes the league and thought the Flyers should have taken a different approach for a long time. I'm encouraged by what they're doing under Hextall and Hakstol.
Yeah, tough to say, but easy to see the results. Tell me a little bit then of your opinion. That's your piece today. Flyers, Hakstol evolving as NHL head coach. And, it's not a lot of guys that make the jump from college hockey to the pros. Badger Bob was one of them out of Wisconsin, and I think Mike Keenan might have done it at one point in time. But, there's not a lot of guys that make that move. So maybe talk a little bit about what you learned in your piece and what you learned about 47-year-old Dave Hakstol.
Yeah, he's become a guy who I think people don't know very much about, certainly in the Philadelphia area. He doesn't say very much. He's kind of taciturn with the media. Like I said in the piece, it's like he aspires to be as insightful as a piece of number 4 sandpaper. He just doesn't want to talk to the media or deal with us at all. And so I wanted to talk to people who knew him, who had competed against him, who coached with him, just to get a sense of what he's like and whether they thought he would make this transition relatively easily. And, the University of North Dakota is a college hockey athletic department and program first and foremost. I mean, it's not like, it's sort of like basketball at Louisville. It is the crown jewel of the program.
Oh, yeah, they're the Yankees of college hockey. I would agree.
Yeah, in some ways. And so, I talked to people there, and I talked to people who coached against Hakstol to get a sense of that culture. So that, and it shows that, he's the kind of guy, given what he experienced at North Dakota, that, making the jump to the NHL is not going to be too big for him. And I think you've seen that so far this year. The Flyers have been the team, really, that I think reasonable people expected them to be. It was going to be tough for them to make the playoffs based on the talent and depth they have on their roster. And as long as Hakstol didn't prove himself to be completely incompetent and in over his head, then, okay, he seems to be the kind of guy that Ron Hextall, can use as a head coach and continue to grow the team. And let's face it, that's the point of all this. They've got all these prospects in the minor leagues and in their system that they're kind of waiting to develop and bring up. And it's going to be Dave Hakstol's job to nurture those guys and grow them into a team that can compete for a Stanley Cup.
13 former UND players in the NHL. You wrote about that. Jonathan Toews, Chris Vandevelde on the Flyers. And like you hinted at, that Engelstad Arena is a big thing. But I know that have you gotten the stare, I guess, is my follow-up question, because that's what everybody talks about. Have you been the victim of one of those yet?
I haven't. No, that's one of the things that everybody I talked to mentioned was the Hakstol stare, which he just kind of looks through you kind of with this icy glare. And I have not gotten it yet, but I've seen it on TV. I've seen some of my colleagues get it. If you happen to catch the TV cameras were at the Flyers morning yesterday before the game against the Sabres, and Hakstol seemed particularly glaring, I guess, at some of my colleagues in the media, asking about some lineup changes he had made. Benching Matt Reed, benching Scott Lawton, bringing in R.J. Umberger. So if you see it, you know it. I mean, and so I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit too.
Mike Sielski, 2 great pieces for the price of one. You get the Hakstol piece and also the piece on Okafor. Really good stuff. Philly.com.
Award-winning columnist, Mike Sielski.
That's right.
I think that's how you have to introduce him
from now on. From this moment on.
It's just Mike, guys. It's just
Mike, it's always a pleasure. Enjoy the weekend, pal. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, he writes